to the Tide Pod, hosted by your friendly neighborhood PhD. Hi, everybody. It's another edition of the Tide Pod, and today I'm joined by guest Justin Moy, and we're going to talk a little bit about his diagnosis and journey with MD, and then go from there and kind of have our usual back and forth conversation. So it's great to have you, Justin. Thanks for joining.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Ty.
Yeah, absolutely. So just starting off, I kind of just generally would like to know a little bit about you and what you're involved with, and maybe some of your passions or things you enjoy as well to start off.
Sure. So my name is Justin Moy. I was born with LAMA2 congenital muscular dystrophy. But beyond that, I'm also a third-year PhD candidate at Boston University studying bioinformatics, where my work involves a lot on cell-cell communication, both in the context of muscle disease as well as heart disease. Outside of school, I really enjoy singing. I enjoy traveling places, tasting new foods, and just seeing the sights and being outdoors.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. It's definitely nice to have some warm weather too to start getting out again. But
Yes. Well, I mean, the cold weather doesn't slow you down, but you must be used to the, what is it, warm every single day in New Mexico?
well, it is, and I just moved to Tennessee in the last few months, so
Oh,
it's
really?
a whole new
Okay.
climate trying to get used to it. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. hmm
I'm curious, what is the most memorable place you've traveled recently?
The most memorable place that I've traveled recently, in February, my
Uh-huh.
friend got married. So we actually went to Pakistan, and that was a
Nice.
lot of fun. It was really, really cool. And it was really great to see, the city. I think Boston traffic is bad, but if you go over to Lahore, traffic
Mhm.
is a lot worse,
Oh no.
So you
Yeah,
have people crossing 8-lane highways. You have, um, cars, trucks,
yeah,
carts, donkeys, lots of different things. But
yeah.
that was probably the most memorable
Oh my gosh.
experience.
Wow, I can't imagine, being closer to the East Coast now. It's already worse than New Mexico, so I can't imagine. How is the
Mhm.
accessibility over there?
I would say that it was getting better. I think
Hmm.
that recently there has been a lot of work as far as the advocacy community in Pakistan.
Hmm.
And so there was a lot of, acknowledgments of the accessibility community, handicap accessible
Hmm.
bathrooms in more recently built government areas.
Okay.
But as far as like city centers or older areas, there was very little handicap
No.
accessibility. That being
Yeah.
said, everybody there was really friendly and always very happy to help if we needed something. So, if there were stairs, the people would come and help lift us off the stairs. They'd tell my dad,
Yeah.
like, no, 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 we got this. We
Don't
got
do that.
this.
Yeah.
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 So,
Well, that's great that
yeah,
they were
yeah.
they were so helpful that way. So was there, in your sense, was there still some ableism there that compared it all to, I don't know, some of your experiences in the US, or what was that like
Um,
for you?
I wouldn't say that there was particularly, I didn't experience any
Yeah.
ableism. That said, I was there as a tourist, looking
Right.
around. So I
Right.
wasn't there on the day to day. So, I think that, again, there is that advocacy community there. But I don't really know to the extent that it is ingrained in the culture.
Yeah. Okay. That makes total sense. I'm just always curious. I actually haven't
Mhm,
traveled out of the country, so I don't know, kind of what that experience would be like. So I wanted to
mhm,
get your thoughts there. Yeah. Well, what was your journey like into, being a PhD student and getting into research and everything? Was it kind of, I guess, something you were interested in a long time based on, your diagnosis and everything, or how did that develop for you?
Yeah, so from a very young age, I've known that I've wanted to go into the sciences and that my goal in life is to eventually cure my disease.
Yeah.
So for me, I've kind of been tracked on how can I contribute the most to that point. And so for a very long time, I thought that I could, go into wet lab science, do bench work, be a
All right.
biologist. But getting into high school, actually going into chemistry and biology class and trying to do bench work labs, you
Yeah.
realize that with your physical limitations, you can't really make a whole career out of that.
Right.
And so, luckily for me, I had the opportunity to tour a pharmaceutical company, and there I discovered bioinformatics. And it's
Nice.
like, this is perfect. I can work on the computer, but I can still contribute to biology, to
uh,
new understanding. And so, from that point, I'm like, I am going to become a bioinformatician. And so, for me, I did my undergrad at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in
mhm.
bioinformatics, and then I got my master's there as well, working with
Okay.
the NIH. And then I started my PhD in bioinformatics at Boston University. And for me, it's just been a very natural progression. And for the sciences, having a PhD is basically the top level. You're able to set your own course, chart what you want to do. And so for me, it was very important to be able to reach that top level degree. And
Yeah.
so, I still have 2.5 years on average
Mhm.
uh, out of 5.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're progressing very, very close to the end there to complete your degree and everything.
hmm
I'm
hmm
curious, me. in high school, I was in a rural community. And so, and with my, my abilities at the time, I was able to do just a little bit of wet lab type, work in the classroom. But when I got into bioengineering, I started quickly realizing like, sure, I can maybe, like I started making some vesicles even like,
Hmm.
for experiments and things. And I was realizing like, yes, I maybe could do it, but it's going to be
Hmm.
so slow and time consuming, that I can't really
Hmm.
apply knowledge and everything. So, that was kind of my
Yeah.
experience into wet lab. But what you kind of reached that point in high school, right? And quickly realized that, you wanted to go into something that was a little bit more, um, something you could have a little more control over maybe. Um,
Yeah.
what is your progression as far as, have you like found yourself readapting or readjusting to things specifically with bioinformatics too, like computer usage and everything? Or has that been
That's
relatively the same?
that's been relatively stable. I would say as
Yeah.
far as my disease progression went,
Hmm.
um, I think during adolescence, that's when there was a lot of decline. But since
Yeah.
I was maybe about 14, 15, it's remained very stable since
Okay.
then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like, there's these like pivot points or transition points where it progresses in my experience, and so it seems like I've had to sort of pivot to
Hmm.
different, things like 4 or 5 times now, it seems
Hmm.
like. So
Hmm. Hmm.
so I'm always curious, different types of MD, kind of how that
Yeah.
experience was for you.
Exactly. And I know for you though, you've had a lot of different pivot points, not only with your disease, but with your
Yeah,
career and your life as
yeah,
well. Did you find that those generally aligned with changes in your disease progression, or did you find that,
yeah.
it's a mix of things?
I think overall it was, very, very much, related or connected to that, and this most recent one with the gallbladder issues, and I had that out and spent time in ICU, and that obviously was the most advanced progression I've had,
Hmm.
at any point. And so with I have like ventilator needs in the medical side, so
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
found that not being able to work, it was, something I really had to deep dive into. Like, do I want to stay
Hmm.
directly in engineering or do I want to, sort of pivot and see where it goes? So,
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm still kind of figuring it out, honestly, but
Yeah.
um,
And so was the
yeah,
sepsis, do you think,
yeah.
caused by the muscular dystrophy, or do you think it was a separate incident?
I think the gallbladder itself, sort of was toxic to the
Hmm.
rest of the body. And I think I let it get to the point where, it was affecting everything, breathing,
Hmm.
and things like that. So I think that was the cause, but because of the MD, everything else was,
Hmm.
more severe because of it
I
is
see.
kind of how I feel. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but yeah, actually on the medical side, that's a good segue. Why has your experience been with doctors and everything where you are? Like, have you found a good care team, or is that something you've kind of had to really work towards?
So I think I've been very lucky growing up in Massachusetts in that we
Hmm.
have a lot of the best medical institutions in the world. And so I was very lucky when I was first diagnosed.
Hmm.
My pediatrician actually had done their residency with the neurologists that specialized in pediatric neuromuscular disorders
Hmm.
at Boston Children's Hospital. So very quickly, I was able to get my diagnosis, and at the time, it was a muscle biopsy, but
Hmm.
they knew this was definitely muscular dystrophy and was able to put together a very good care team, along with the help from the Muscular Dystrophy Association as well.
Hmm.
Because 20 years ago, there wasn't as much knowledge, there wasn't as many platforms to share that knowledge as there are
Right.
today. And so being able to be at an institution where there was that knowledge and where there was that expertise was very helpful. That
Hmm.
being said, my muscular dystrophy is on the rarer side of other muscular dystrophies.
Hmm.
So there isn't a lot of clinical guidelines per se on what you should expect, what the progression should be. So a lot of my appointments are, okay, let's check on you, make sure nothing is going downhill.
Hmm.
And then, if nothing's going downhill, they're like, great.
And
If
then
something is,
great.
then it's
Yeah.
like, okay, let's figure out what's going on here. So
Yeah.
in that sense, I would say that I am very lucky to have a good care team and a care team that is able to understand neuromuscular disorders.
Right. Right. That makes all the difference in the world, I think. And I've
Hmm.
actually transitioned to Vanderbilt here, and there's an MDA clinic and care team there that I found has been really really good in the last year or so. That's
Hmm.
it's been really helpful.
Hmm.
Are there any treatments that you've been like that they've suggested or you've tried anything that's worked really well more than other options?
So there are currently no treatments for Lamb2
Hmm.
congenital muscular dystrophy.
Yeah.
That being said, I do follow the science, and there are
Yeah.
promising clinical avenues in mice right now.
Right.
But again,
Right.
a mouse is not a tiny human, so.
It always feels like that's such an incremental, slow moving thing too, right? Like
Mhm.
going from that point to to developing maybe a pharmaceutical and then going through the FDA approvals and I mean, there's just so much involved, in the, well, more
Yeah.
than many, on what that looks like.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
but you probably have more perspective than I do. At least for me, in the past 20 years, I've seen a lot of progress
yeah,
being made. And even though that is incremental, and I haven't really seen like big leaps, I
yeah,
think that there is still progress. Because when I was
right,
diagnosed, again, I alluded to this earlier, it was
yeah,
muscle biopsy, but I was able to get
right.
a genetic diagnosis when I was 15 years old that did confirm the muscle biopsy, luckily.
Right,
Uh,
right, and it's so
yeah.
interesting now. I actually did one of the saliva kits in home, and that was what I just sent in that I got results back for. So
Hmm.
from that side of it, it's definitely progressed quite a lot. And um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think certain types of MD for sure. There's been some definite advances, but I know that it seems like there's so much diversity within every MD diagnosis that it can feel like extremely painstakingly slow, obviously, to make progress,
Exactly, but
but
I
it
think
is
that
there. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and I think that the more progress that is made, I think
yeah,
it'll cross over. For instance, if our regulatory bodies see, oh, we've approved a drug for this muscular dystrophy, and then here's a
hmm,
similar mechanism of action or a similar disease, we can be like, well, let's take these clinical endpoints and let's
right,
use these for our trials. Let's take the learnings that we have from previous drugs and let's now apply them here and then speed up the process. So I think
right.
that even though progress has been slow for the past 50 years, I think that we are in a time now where I think progress will rapidly increase.
Right, right. I sure think so too. And there's so many connections with proteins that are involved in the muscle structure and those breaking down. That there's always going to be some comparisons that can be made between different types. I think so. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's definitely hoping for more advances coming quickly down the future. But I'd like to talk a little bit now too about like your advocacy and awareness and like where you are in that community and what your work is there.
Sure. So I do a lot of work with the Muscular Dystrophy Association in America, where I served as national ambassador from 2018 to 2019. And a
Okay.
lot of that was speaking with scientists, speaking with donors, and really sharing my story and how the Muscular Dystrophy Association has helped. I think that the MDA is very well positioned as one of the largest funders of neuromuscular research in the world to be able to push the portfolio
Mhm.
on advancing both treatments, cures, as well as access to care and access to basically quality of life.
Mhm.
And so I think for me, my advocacy is really about how do we let people know that people living with neuromuscular disorders can try to live a normal, a healthy, and a fulfilling life. More recently, I've been doing a lot of work internationally as
Okay.
well, reaching out to disease specific organizations in Europe and India, because when you think of a rare disease, it may be rare within your population, but if you aggregate the whole world together, then a few 100,000 people per country suddenly becomes a few million.
Right.
And so I think that not only domestic advocacy, but also international advocacy is really important. And we're at a point now where we can begin to bring together these international groups.
Exactly. Yeah, that's something that I've even found just, myself recently, the community as a whole within, MD. If you look across the world and with online access and social media, it's, so many more connections in the community is definitely bigger, like you're saying. So
Mhm.
that's really great. Is there the organizations that you've worked with in other countries, do they work also with MDA in the US? Is there kind of a connection there with all of them?
So I think there is a little bit of crosstalk,
Hmm.
but I think that when we talk about different organizations, there is
Hmm.
still a lot of that per country basis, just on a
Yeah.
in terms of language, regulatory bodies that they need to deal
Hmm.
with, as well as just the culture as well. So just to
True.
give you an example, one of the organizations that I've been in contact with, Lama to India,
Mhm.
their focus is more on building awareness because the community isn't aware of Lama 2 muscular dystrophy and neuromuscular dystrophies in general. And so a lot of that
Mhm.
is this is something that exists and taking away the stigma around that. Whereas, say, in Europe, there's an organization called Forcera in the Netherlands. Their
Mhm.
focus is more on raising money for research because they have those institutions that already are aware that this is a problem and that they have that capability to do that research. So again, I think that while having a large organization like the MDA is important for propelling research, I think there's still space for those local country specific um,
Right.
organizations because again, they really know what's going on with their
Yeah.
local communities.
Well,
So.
that makes, that's a really good point you make there because there does need to be some specificity to, the country and where they are as far as, having an infrastructure to help with, with MD and things like that. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mhm.
In your research, do you work with any collaborators in other countries on like your scientific, like your PhD studies, anything like that?
Well, right now we just applied for a grant to
Mhm.
do spatial transcriptomics, which measures gene expression or like the amount of protein that
Yeah.
is produced on a per cell basis, while also seeing where in space it is. And in
Mhm.
that collaboration, we plan to work with collaborators in Brazil, as well as locally as well. So again, I think
Yeah.
that having these international collaborations is important because
Mhm.
number one, it brings in outside perspectives, but also two, it opens up whole new patient populations.
Right.
Um, and especially in the case where you have specific founder mutations in a specific population,
Mhm.
then if you don't know about those mutations that may affect manifestation differently,
Mhm. Yeah.
then
You're
I think you're
missing a
really
large
missing
segment.
a
Yeah.
large segment. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That's something, that I definitely enjoyed too when I was doing research like that. It seemed like you could really, kind of open up, more doorways by collaborating like that.
Hmm.
In terms of um, like your, I guess, progression with MD and everything on submitting grants and things like that, have you kind of evolved in your ability? Like, have you used maybe like voice to text or any specific like adaptive tools, to help with your research?
Um, Not particularly. I'm
Okay.
an old-fashioned typer. I
Yeah.
like typing. That being said, I do the little chicken peck when I type. I don't
Right.
really do the two-handed type.
Yeah.
Um, but I just think that with the voice to text, especially with technical language,
Hmm.
there are so many screw ups that it takes more time to fix all of
You
the
become
errors
a very, very good editor quickly that way. Yeah. Yeah.
than to actually just type out everything.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I like good old fashioned typing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
found that I always got frustrated with my case because of the speed, that I was able to
Hmm.
obviously, put together, manuscripts or anything. So,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
been evolution. I'm using just a trackpad now with a digital keyboard these days. And so that's,
Yeah.
it's kind of,
No,
it's changed quite a lot. Yeah.
occasionally I will use the digital keyboard as well.
Yeah.
Um, so it depends
Yeah.
though. Sometimes I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, let's use the digital keyboard. Sometimes it's, oh, I'll just type it. It
Right.
really depends. Because if I'm typing something short,
Mhm.
then the digital keyboard is fine. But if I have to type a ton of words, then
Right.
just having the keyboard uses a lot less energy.
Right. Right. I remember, so many of the acronyms. I'm sure you're aware of those too, when you're writing technically, like it's a little bit challenging for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think that as technology gets better, especially with all of the voice to text, I think that
Yeah.
problem will slowly go away. But for now, unless we're training our models on a bunch of PhDs, we're not going to
Yeah.
get the level of specificity that we need.
Right, right, exactly. How about your like power chair? Like, how has your equipment sort of evolved over the years? Do you find that it's more accommodating now, or has it been pretty consistent overall?
I would say that it's been consistent in that I've
Yeah.
used a power chair since about middle school.
Hmm.
Before that, I used a manual wheelchair. But I guess going back to the topic of travel,
Hmm.
I don't necessarily travel with my power chair. If I'm going on a flight, I have a travel power chair that's only 50 pounds and doesn't
Nice.
have all of the easy breakable points because I'm very
Yeah.
afraid that if I fly, the wheelchair is going to get broken, especially with all of the movable areas.
Hmm.
So, in that sense, I would say that travel accessibility has definitely changed, especially now going to conferences and stuff
Yeah.
internationally. Having a power chair there is a lot better than if I just had like a stroller and needed to be pushed around.
Right.
Um, so yeah, in that sense, I would say that as my travel needs have changed, I would say that in that sense,
Yeah, that has helped that way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I know so many of us, that do use power chairs are always having issues with air travel, and parts
Hmm.
breaking off and things. So that's,
Hmm.
I know that's something that's constantly a concern,
Yeah.
for the community for sure.
Do you use a power chair?
I do. Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
when you moved from New Mexico to Tennessee, did you fly or did you take the train,
Yeah.
drive?
So I the last time I flew was about 2012, I think,
Okay.
and I was going to conferences in Seattle, San Francisco. So I was flying to those areas at the time,
Hmm.
and going through the whole process with that. But for Tennessee, well, with my ventilator and everything now, and the
Hmm.
mobility is so much less since the hospital stay. So I ended up just going in my motorized chair into the van, and family came out that way. So
Hmm.
it's about a 18-20 hour drive, just straight up drive time. So that
Hmm.
was it's a challenge, but less injuries, I think, happening for
Hmm.
me personally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What's your experience been like with the airlines, have they been pretty accommodating for you on that?
I would say that the airlines have been pretty accommodating,
Yeah,
and I think it really depends on the where you're going and
true.
how much airport infrastructure there is. Uh, so flying domestically is generally fine. I really like JetBlue
Okay.
personally. They've done a very good job uh, with, I guess, handling the wheelchair. Being accommodating with seating as well,
Yeah.
and just generally having a protocol in place to deal with wheelchairs.
Hmm.
Um, Internationally, I think it really depends. Um, I haven't had a bad experience with international airlines per se, but
Hmm.
some airlines know how to deal with a wheelchair more than others,
Yeah.
especially when you come to the gate and you're like, "Hey, I have a wheelchair," and they're like, "Oh, did you fill out the form?" And I'm like, "Yes, I filled out the form,"
Yeah.
and they're like, "We don't see a form." So I
Oh
have
no.
a screenshot and a printout of all of the specs of my travel wheelchair, so I can
Hmm.
be like, "Here is all the details," and
Yeah.
that generally speeds things up. The other thing too, though, is uh, whether or not you'll get your wheelchair at the gate. And I think that really depends. Generally, when I've gone to Europe, they've done a pretty good job about that. But most recently, on the way to Pakistan, we had to stop through Doha, and I think there was a few issues with like customs as
Mhm.
and security as to why not they couldn't have the chair at the gate. But I would have to fly more on Qatar Airways to get more data on that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
But do you think that if there was some kind of training or some kind of modules on how to handle, different types of wheelchairs, things like that, do you think that's something that could help and maybe be used in the future? Or do you think it's going to always be, you kind of have to have your list of specs and make sure that, all that's covered?
I think training can only do so much because, having an online module, we've all
Yeah,
been through the experience where you just, click through the online module till the
true.
end.
Right,
Um, and even if it's in-person training, it really matters so much about who's actually doing the training. And then do you have enforcement policies to actually
right,
make sure that the training is put into effect? So I think that general awareness and I think training in general can help, but I think that there will always be bad experiences and
right.
cases where training is not followed.
Right, right. And you're right. That is, in the end, it's kind of on, the wheelchair user to try to have, some information on that to try to help cover the gaps and things. So
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I think people want to help. I
Oh
don't think
yeah.
it's like people are, "Oh, I'm gonna destroy this wheelchair on this airplane
Right.
today,"
Like
so
malicious intent. Yeah, there's not
I think
usually any
really
of that.
it's yeah, yeah, so I think it's
Yeah.
more, on your end, can you convey what you need in order for there to be a good travel experience?
Right, right. And that kind of leads me into the whole like self-advocacy thing. Is that
Mhm.
something that you sort of developed along the way, or have you kind of always had that since a young age? Did you kind of learn that early on?
I definitely learned self-advocacy pretty early on,
Hmm.
and I think the most important thing is to learn how to ask for help, and I remember during elementary school, that was a big thing, "Justin, if you need help, ask for help."
That's right. Yep.
So I would say that from a very young age, I was taught self-advocacy, and taught to be, an outgoing person because that again helps with the self-advocacy skills.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
And with the MDA, you were the national ambassador, you said, for a year. What
2
was
years,
that?
yes.
2 years? Yeah. What was that like? Did you find, were there really, good things and maybe some lessons learned there too that you
Well,
had?
I think that being national ambassador was an important experience for me, not only because I got to tell my story, but also because you get the opportunities to speak to so many people.
Hmm.
And you really get a large perspective on a lot of different people all around the country. I think
Hmm.
that advocating for yourself, being an ambassador locally, you get to meet a lot of people. But then
Yeah.
when you do that nationally, you just get a wider array of different perspectives. And I think for me, that's helped also my advocacy locally because then I can go back and
Yeah.
say, this is how it is for other parts of the country, rural versus urban or places that have more or less resources. And
Right.
so I think it really helps to describe the mission.
Right. No, that makes total sense because the perspective, is it depends so much, I think, on the environment,
Hmm.
and even in Mexico between, small towns and cities, it was really significantly different in my experience too. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think more
So
people, have that awareness now, hopefully.
So if you're at Vanderbilt now, are you
Yeah.
in Nashville proper or?
So actually I'm living about 2 hours south of
Oh, okay.
Nashville near closer to Chattanooga area, so the southern part of the state. Yeah.
I see. I see.
Yeah. So yeah, it's again, I'm in a semi-rural area
Hmm.
still,
Hmm.
which is good for like nature, getting outdoors and everything. But then there's, obviously the trade-off with, less care options and conveniences, aren't available as readily as they are in somewhere like Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's always that trade-off, I find. Yeah. But yeah, no, I joined NDA as just a local ambassador last year. So I'm looking forward to kind of getting more involved, and I've been meeting quite a few people with NDA here recently, so it's been really good.
Yeah, no, it's really good. What made you decide to move to Nashville?
So actually, I have my sister moved out here in 2017, and her and her husband have a kid, and all his family is out here too. So
Okay.
it was kind of a combination of that, and then most of my family had kind of moved out of state at that point, and then there were some health needs with myself and other parts of the family too. So
I see.
too many big things at once just made sense to make the move.
So, what would you say then the biggest difference between your care in rural versus urban New Mexico versus Tennessee
Well,
is?
just New Mexico compared to Tennessee in general is really, really different. Like just the number of doctors and the number of specialists I find that are more expert. They just have more knowledge, I think, of different aspects of MD, for sure. And I think part of it too is me just, I think, adapting and learning more and being more open to things as well, because as a kid, I was very resistant to doing too many medical appointments and letting that sort of dictate and keep me away from my academic, life and everything like that. So I was always really fighting against it. And so now I'm, probably a lot more open to just everything in general. So I think that also influences, not just the rural and urban thing, but I do find that Tennessee has just more resources available. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. But then again, care, looking for caregivers to help and everything. It's been mostly my parents and I over the years, but now I've been exploring some, outside help, and it's the same challenge here as in rural New Mexico as far as getting access, to care assistance versus the city. So that's the big hurdle I'm kind of working on.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that's a good point too. What has your experience been like with care? Like, are you able to kind of have some autonomy, independence, or is it mostly, has it always been kind of the same?
Well, for me, I've had sort of a bit of mixed experiences. So
Yeah.
during my undergrad, I did hire help from outside in order
Okay.
to be at college, which was about 45 minutes away from where I lived,
Yep.
more independently. But since starting my PhD, my care has been coming from mainly my family. And I think a big part of that is economics.
Sure. Right.
Um, I think where I was for undergrad, it was a lot easier to find people that were willing to work for the, uh, state subsidized healthcare wage
Right.
level. And then post pandemic, there has been a shortage of people in those professions, and also too an increase in wages outside of the government rate, which has
Right.
made care or finding care very hard. So I think it really depends on the population and the economy. And right now, I think at least we're in a position where it is going to be hard to find outside
Right.
care. And I don't know if that's the same situation that you've had as well.
It's been really hard, and I hadn't, outside the last probably 3 years, I haven't even looked for outside care before. So I don't really know what it was like before, but post pandemic, it's been very, very difficult, and I found that finding funding also to support that has been a challenge. I don't know if it's been that way, for you, but it just seems like there's several issues that make it hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I think that a lot of it is how is the economy doing? I mean, this is not an
True.
economy podcast,
Right.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
think
don't think
also,
that's our areas of expertise necessarily, but yeah.
but I think ultimately when it comes down to hiring people, it does come out to what is the job market like for
Yeah.
everybody else and other
Right.
positions.
Right. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But I guess kind of closing out a little bit, I want to talk more about your plans with your PhD, like what you want to do afterwards. Do you want to start your own research group, or where do you see your research going next?
Well, I've always wanted to go into academia, and I
Mhm.
think that right now that is still the path forward.
Yeah.
Um, and so for me, next steps would be go get postdoc, then
Mhm.
go find tenure track position at
Right.
university with a hospital attached to it.
Mhm.
And so for me, I want to stay in Massachusetts, so that really narrows it down to a
True.
few universities.
Yeah.
But that's, I guess, my general outlook. And I do want to be my own PI. I want to lead my own lab,
Mhm.
and I think I've been getting a lot of experience, at least with helping to form lab culture, because when I joined my PI's lab, he was a very new PI,
Mhm.
so I got a lot of experience helping to craft lab culture and help bring people together, which I think is good training for the future.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
see yourself sort of emphasizing any like DEI or DEIA, anything like that in your lab group? Like, do you see that being kind of something maybe at least involved with it as well?
Well, I think that having a diversity of perspectives is very important in any
Right.
academic setting. And I also think that, by the time that you have people coming into your lab that have
Hmm.
been accepted into a PhD program, at that point, everybody is very, very qualified.
True. Yeah.
Um, and so for me, I think that the most important thing is fostering an environment where you can have a diversity of perspectives, and where that diversity of perspectives, whether it's like lived experience or even if it's technical skills, can come together to really build a cohesive and enhanced whole.
Right. Right. I totally agree. And I think back on my experience, with the PhD program and everything, that you do meet people who are obviously, very qualified because they made it to that point. But I find that the perspectives and ideas are often really, diverse, and it's in a good way. It makes a good team, it seems like. So,
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
looking forward to hearing more about, kind of what you're doing as a PI here in the near future, hopefully.
Maybe 10 years down the line, we'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah. Do you have a idea where you want to try to go as a postdoc?
Well, my top choices would be Harvard Medical School, just because
Mhm.
they have so many hospitals
Yeah,
attached to them, and there's a lot of groundbreaking research being done there. But
yeah,
really, I would be happy with anywhere that I would be able to get a little bit more biological and patient facing experience.
right,
During my undergrad, I focused a lot more on like the bio side of things. So during my PhD, I decided to focus more on building those algorithmic computer science
right,
skills. And so ultimately, if I want to be well balanced, I do need a little bit more patient facing focus.
right. Have that
Yeah.
that element sort of incorporated into your profile, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's really good. Definitely being in the academia field and knowing kind of the steps involved and everything. That's definitely. I'm excited to see where you go next with it. So
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess for you, I mean, I know we're closing out a little bit here, but
yeah,
what are your future steps? I know that you pivoted towards more advocacy, but like in an academic sphere. What does that look like for you, and how do you see that, 10 years
yeah.
down the future?
With I do find that the time that I have now for volunteering and for advocacy, doing some social media work and the podcasting, I think that I want to keep part of that element, going forward as well. And I would like to pivot it, a little bit more back to academia, maybe start sharing some more specific stories to, being in a bioengineering field and what some of the things were that I learned from that.
Mhm.
I'd like to share, more of that story. And I'm also working on maybe some collaborations with people in like critical disability studies, and focusing more kind of on maybe even a little bit of the societal, things that are
Mhm.
going on, and focus on that as kind of a research area, while still sharing like my own story too. Some combination of that I think is where, I want to go at least, the next 5 years or so.
I see. I see.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't see me getting back directly into, full time academia. Just, the way life's path has kind of gone for me. So
I see. I see.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But that's kind of where things are looking. So we'll see
Mhm.
where it goes. Yeah, just I guess the final question I'd like to ask is, kind of what your message or content is going forward, and how people can find more about, you and your work, and maybe even reach out and ask you a little bit more about, what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I'm on Instagram at JMOY_MDA USA.
Hmm.
And that's generally where I post a lot about what I've been doing, my
Hmm.
travels, just everyday sort of tidbits.
Right.
You can also follow me on LinkedIn. Do I check that as often? Not necessarily,
Not
but I
necessarily.
try to
Yeah.
keep it up to date.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think really it's about sharing my story, sharing my research. And it's really a combination of those two, because for me, my research is very personal and my mission is very personal to me. And
Right.
so I feel like, as I proceed in both my research, my career, and in my personal life, I feel like the two are very intertwined. So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Your passions are aligned in that way really well. So
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Well, Justin, I sure appreciate it. And I'll be sure to mention, your different areas people can find you, and see what you're doing. So I sure appreciate the time.
Wonderful. No, thank you so much, Ty, for having me, and good luck with Tennessee. Good luck with your
Thanks.
podcast, and good luck with your path forward.
Great. Yeah, you too. You too.